In StructureSolver 8.1, we've introduced the model fault only stratigraphic flag for faults. This simple flag allows you to easily differentiate faults which are used only for structural modeling from faults which are used in your primary structural interpretation. This enables you to superimpose structural models on top of your full interpretation without interfering with the coloring, area depth, analysis, etc. I will illustrate this new feature using an example from the deep water part of the Niger Delta. We've used this example in a number of our videos and reports. This example shows a fault propagation fold which has deformed a pre-growth sequence, and there's a growth sequence developed above it during the propagation of the fault. As you can see from this example, the coloring is automatic given the interpretation of the horizons and faults. We can do things like adding a projected horizon, and you'll see that the horizon projects quite well across the array of faults. We can also turn on an area depth graph, which we've developed earlier in a very simple way. And you can see that the area depth graph gives us both the depth of the detachment and also the displacements within the pre-growth and the growth sequences, and also some indication of layer parallel strain. So let's just hide that for the moment. And what we're going to do now is show the interpretation dashboard and turn on a fault which we've used to create a forward model of the same structure. The fault for the forward model is not exactly the same as the interpreted fault originally, but it gives a very good model for the overall structure of the fault. If we display horizon linkages and intersections, you'll see there's now warnings associated with the additional intersections of the model fault. Likewise, if we add a projected horizon, we'll get spurious results, again because of the double intersections. If we turn on area depth graph again, we'll see we have multiple warnings associated with intersections between the interpreted horizons and the model faults, which will render the area depth graph at least partially invalid. So having two faults superimposed upon each other is not really compatible with either proper coloring, proper determination of horizon fault intersections, or with area depth, and also some other things that depend upon the horizon fault intersections to be correct. So in our new version, we've just simply added a stratigraphic flag for faults. We can change the stratigraphic flag for the fault from none to model fault only. And when we change it to model fault only, that excludes that fault from all of those horizon fault intersections. So that's a pretty good method for doing this. And now we can modify this fault. It will change its parameters, and we have no interference with the rest of the structure. And we can also compare the displacements on the model fault with the displacements from the area depth, and we see we get pretty good correspondence with those on the left-hand side, which is another thing that was not really possible when we could not have separate model faults from interpreted faults. When you're creating a new curve category, you can also set stratigraphic flag right from the beginning, and that enables you, or alternatively, you can change it at some later point. So that's our new feature. We think this will help quite often when you're doing integrated analysis that involves both the detailed interpretation of a section plus modeling some of the faults, because quite often the faults you need for a structural model tend to be simpler and maybe sort of averaged out in some way compared with the faults that you use for your base interpretation. If you use the faults for your base interpretation to create a model, then generally speaking, that will have too many bends and kinks in it to get a good model.